Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us for the very first episode of Pacific Power Hour. This is a new webinar series that we've created specifically for manufacturers up and down the West Coast, south of or west of Wyoming. Today, we've got a triple J threat with myself, Jason Hunt of Dye CNC, and Jacob Horne of Summit 7. As many of you know, the West Coast is an absolute hub of manufacturing for, a lot of the largest industries across the country, whether it be aerospace, defense, semiconductor, medical, and more, spanning across over 3, 4, 5,000 custom part manufacturers like yourselves that support machining and fabrication. A big reason for why we created this webinar is because we've found that on the West Coast specifically, we're trying to build a sense of collaboration, manufacturing community to help bolster, those different supply chains. So really purpose of this webinar series is to bring industry leaders together as well as industry partners to share what's working, what challenges are out there, how are people going about innovating at their shop so that we can work together to, bring manufacturing back to the United States and strengthen the West Coast manufacturing supply chain. So without further ado, I'll let our guests introduce themselves. We've got Jason Hunt, Chief Operating Officer of Dye CNC, and Jacob Horne, Chief Evangelist of Summit 7. So Jason, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself here first, that would be great.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining. I want to say thanks to Jake and Paperless Parts and Jacob, Summit 7, for letting me join him on this webinar. My name's Jason Hunt. I'm Chief Operating Officer of Dye CNC. I've been doing this for about 4 years now. Basically, I transitioned from the military, retired basically, 22 years in service. Started off as being the end user of aerospace and defense parts, which is kind of cool. And then going and seeing, what it takes to really develop all that. And so really didn't really have a industrial or a pedigree in manufacturing, but found my place here and definitely love the idea of manufacturing and servicing our veterans in this from the ground up. Been basically stationed here in San Diego in the military for 15 years. And then was when I initially showed up here, I interned here for about 6 months, did a business assessment on the company, evaluated them for, areas that they can improve. And that's really when I found my place here. And then at the end of my internship, they offered me the position. And ever since then, from the company, we've doubled in size and in revenue. So doing a great job here and looking to share some insights with the rest of the West Coast manufacturers, what I can anyways. Thanks, Jake.
Awesome. Jacob, over to you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I actually just got back from a big event in Reston, and I always complain that even though there's a huge number of companies in the defense industrial base, the manufacturing industrial base on the West Coast, there's just like not that many conferences like there are sometimes on the East Coast, especially in the Beltway, especially when there are regulatory impacts on those industries. So I love flying to DC as much as everybody, but I'm glad that we're doing these webinars and sort of doing something closer to home. So yeah, I'm Jacob Horne, Chief Security Evangelist at Summit 7. Chief Security Evangelist is a completely made up title. It means that I do not have a sales quota. I'm not here to pitch you on services or sell you anything. My primary job is to translate cybersecurity regulations, cybersecurity controls, NIST standards, all of the things related to acronyms like CMMC, DFARS, NIST, things like that into something that is understandable to regular humans. Summit 7 is a managed service provider. So think of us as your outsourced IT and security department. Most manufacturers are small enough that they don't have that in-house expertise. And even if they wanted to have that in-house expertise, it's cheaper to outsource it. And given the fact that the regulatory winds are blowing the way that they're blowing, you eventually have to make a decision about how you're going to tackle that problem. I've been working in cybersecurity for almost 20 years. I spent 8 years active duty in the Navy doing some cool stuff over there, did deployments, worked with NSA, did all kinds of fun stuff. Got out and worked as a operator on the sort of SOC watch floor standard way of working in cybersecurity out in Hawaii, living the dream, and then got plopped into the exciting world of defense acquisitions when we came back to Southern California. And as the regulatory thing, world changed, my strange curiosity and expertise in rule books and cybersecurity controls became very valuable. And so I started making content explaining what was going on. And now here we are. So I've been with Summit 7 about almost 5 years now. We do multiple weekly podcasts. We speak at conferences. We put tons and tons of content out on platforms like LinkedIn, trying to explain what's going on. And that's the day job.
Awesome. Thank you both for the introductions here. Jason, we'll shift focus over to you. If you wouldn't mind opening up the conversation just by providing some background on, Dye Precision, what industries you guys support, what are your core competencies, and what were some of the, bigger milestones, turning points, competitive advantages that you guys adopted early on to lead to this success?
Yeah, thanks, Jake. So Dye Precision CNC has been around since 2010. So I came in 2021. We already had established ourselves as one of the premier shops here in Southern California, with customers in aerospace and defense, gas and oil, some other medical, and some industrial, and then even some consumer-based products that we were doing. Very diverse customer base, which is I feel be a real benefit, and it helped us specifically through COVID. I came in and during the back end of COVID, where there was some struggles, specifically in the aerospace and defense area. As we know, everybody on this call, if you were in that manufacturing during that time frame, you did see a drastic slowdown, and maybe even had to lay some people off and make it through that. But I came in through the back end, and so there was an uptick in requirements during that time. But what also was impacting our business was hyperinflation. And so contracts that you did have going into that, coming out of that, if you didn't renegotiate, if you didn't work on material costs, everybody remembers steel prices and aluminum prices, they just went through the roof. So everyone was either, if you were one of these subcontractors, caught in the middle, having a contract before that, and then after that, you definitely had some struggles if you were a fixed firm anyways, which we were. So coming into this business, we were diverse, but we weren't diverse enough, I didn't feel like, to stay safe. So that was one of the areas that I really took an interest in, was making sure our customer base was diverse and we weren't overextended into one customer. Primarily, if you get up to the 40% of your business is done by one customer, and then that customer has an issue, you're gonna suffer. So we and then also diversifying, what our production and prototyping looks like on the shop floor. And so we were heavily into prototyping, and that's a risky area to be as well. But having spread that out across there a little bit, so we have some more production volumes coming in, and then making sure that you're pricing them correct, so you're staying competitive with your customers. So that was one of the areas that I really focused on when I first showed up. But also one of the biggest things, and I know I'm speaking to a lot of our fellow manufacturers out there, was talent was becoming an issue here in the shop as well. One of the things that, I'm from the soft community, special operations community, and one of the soft truths is, people are more important than hardware. I definitely feel like I brought that to the shop here, and I feel that at times manufacturers here don't necessarily look at that. They look at their machines and their equipment and their processes as the key. But truly, I feel like the talent that we have here was something to really hyper focus and invest in, and empowering those people on the shop floor to become more of a team, because it felt like there was a bunch of individuals out there. This is my machine. This is my part that I'm going to make, and it's the best part I can make, right? But then at the same time, you have a guy next to him that's scrapping a bunch of parts, and he didn't feel any kind of ownership into that. So I really brought in and made the company here more of a team, with a team mindset that we succeed and fail based on how the guy to the left and the right of you operates as well. So those were my key areas to focus on, more internally with talent, and then externally with diversifying our customer base so that we stayed secure in any kind of issues that would happen in the future. Because, you know, COVID's not going to be the last thing. Hyperinflation's not going to be the last thing. You know, we're seeing tariffs now. So it's all, you know, we're just kind of, if you're diverse in your customer base and you have a great employee and talent pool, then you're going to be successful and you're going to make it through the next downturn that may happen.
Yeah. Couple follow-up questions there. I guess, how have you gone about attracting new talent, retaining them, and, rallying them towards a common goal of diversifying, growing, et cetera? And then also, along the lines of diversification, like what are some of the initiatives, strategies that you took on as a way to diversify your customer base?
Yeah, perfect. So the first part, attracting younger talent. We have established now an internship. We try to have at least one intern at the company at all times, whether it's from San Diego State University in the aerospace department, whether it's a robotics intern. So we bring that individual in. We normally team them up with the quality department. That seems to be a great area where they can get experience, not only in production programming, but then, every part goes through quality. Every part gets, measured and made sure that it meets the standards and the requirements for the customer. So it just seems to be it's a really good spot to put somebody, and then they find kind of what drives them if they want to get more into programming, or they like the quality or the compliance aspect of things. And then also, I walked through the shop when I first get here, and I was learning the ways of an aerospace and defense manufacturing. And the number one thing I saw is we had an aging workforce, and it's just the younger generation really isn't gravitating towards this industry. And so I did a couple outreach. I went to the Kearney Mesa school and spoke to the manufacturing CNC department that they have there. Had some students, talk to them, and then we're always looking for new talent. Workshop for Warriors is another program that's out there that's great. It's bringing kind of military talent into the pool. And then there's other areas that you can always do reach out. So I would highly encourage manufacturers, whether they're a small shop or a big manufacturing facility, to continue to do outreach and bring in that younger talent. And to the second part of your question, which was customers and how to diversify the customer base, there is ways that you need to look at it and approach it. Aerospace and defense, because there's price points for every single market. If you're doing gas and oil, the price point's different from aerospace and defense, which is different from medical, which is different from semiconductor, and obviously consumer. So doing certain things that make yourself marketable in those areas, and then doing the research beforehand, because you don't want to get so diverse that you can't maintain the requirements. And that's a kind of issue that you kind of want to stay in line with the same requirements. I have not really diversified into automotive because those requirements are different, and it would take kind of a new program manager in the quality department to say, okay, well, they are similar to aerospace and defense. if we start going down this path, it might be difficult to maintain those quality and requirements. Not saying that automotive parts are more difficult than aerospace parts, not at all. But there are nuances to them. Same with space, just like specifically space parts. So what I did is we did, it's important to make sure you're going to those trade shows. It's important to make the brochures, continue to look at the customers in the area, because in Southern California, we have a unique problem here, and it's the cost of our labor. It's higher than any place in the country. Our overhead is higher than any place in the country, and our energy costs are higher than any place in the country. So you take all those like already baked into the cost of running a shop here, and then you try to compete against somebody in New Mexico or Texas. We're already at a disadvantage. So finding that customer that's within your area that you can be a critical supplier for, because that cost that they can save on shipping and making sure that you're delivering parts to their door, that can offset that overhead for you. So really, really, I highly encourage all the shops to really reach out to their area, but definitely don't dismiss customers that are nationwide, because if you are focused on quality above everything else, you can become a critical supplier for a customer that's located in Texas, because they just can't find that quality anywhere else. And it takes sometimes a year or more to develop that system to make sure you're doing that. I hope that answered a few of those questions, Jake.
Yeah, that was great. And, building off that, you alluded to pricing, different industries, different in their own unique way. Obviously, we have a lot of conversations being on the more sales, quoting, estimating side about, customer buying patterns, where if you're working with, semiconductor, folks need quotes back in 4 to 8 hours, whereas with aerospace and defense, people typically operate in procurement windows where they'll hear out all the bids, give you a due date, and you have to respond by then. So is there any, what insights can you share to aerospace and defense buying patterns? Is there any value in getting the quote back faster to maybe, get a second bite at the apple? But yeah, what are some of the nuances as to, how that industry buys parts, anything that surprised you getting into those markets, etc.?
Yeah, great question. And I can only tell you from my experience, and I think customers do have, they have their own unique way of approaching things, is what I've noticed. But there are definitely, you mentioned there, it's how fast you can get the quote back to them. There are the customers out there, and specifically the smaller aerospace and defense customers, that want a quote back as fast as possible. And because they're doing it last minute, they need to get, and the lead time needs to go be as quick as possible. And you can kind of tell by the emails and the follow-ups and, hey, we need this as soon as possible. But by all means, that's not a means to say that you need to, increase your price to those, because I wouldn't suggest that at all. But what I would say is, one of the things to think about when you see that they need that as fast as possible is your lead time. And can you prioritize that part in your shop to meet those lead times? Because if you fail with them, they're going to be a lot more susceptible to lead time disruptions, as opposed to the bigger customers that plan things out, that have, a month or 2 month built into their production window or their MRP. So, think about that when you're coming around. So, and Paperless Parts does a great job. There's, the different price points based on, your lead time. So you can structure those and customize those quotes to those customers. And then also in your turnaround time, what we use Paperless Parts for is our workflow, to make sure that we're staying consistent and we can turn around quotes fast enough for both our bigger customers that are looking for those long, LTAs, those long contracts, which I do start in Paperless Parts, but I export to an Excel document, and then I use that to really manipulate, really define exactly certain properties in our capacity and whether or not we're going to be able to make a lot of those lead times that we're looking at, and then really, really sharpen the pencil. But I would say, your turnaround times for some customers is key. Your lead times for some customers is key. And then also price is king. Everybody knows it. So make sure that, you're pricing your stuff appropriately for how much quality that you're putting into your part. I would never say price your stuff below what you think just to get the part. That's not a good business, strategy. I think you're going to find yourself in a really difficult spot in the future if you start doing that just to gain customers, because then when you start trying to creep your price up on them, they're going to, immediately diversify and look somewhere else. So I would say set your price, make sure that you're taking an acceptable, margin at the end of the day, but also providing the best quality parts you can possibly to your customers, because that only builds your brand and it'll create customers always coming back to you.
Sweet. Along the lines of, maintaining quality, being one of the top priorities for everybody, of course, what are some of the, biggest continuous improvements projects that you're tackling year over year? How do you go about making those decisions as to, what to invest in, and what tools have really helped you make a difference in, continuing to innovate, continuing to improve, as you support your customers?
Yeah, so our CI effort here is robust, and honestly, that's why I was brought in here, was to focus solely on our continuous improvement. Making capital investments, you have to be smart because there's a lot of risk that's involved with it as well. But what we've done is we marry up software with hardware improvements on the shop floor to be a really data-driven company. And to be data-driven, you do have to have some of the best software that you can have here. And then also lining that up, and I don't want to take too much of Jacob's talking points, but lining that up with compliance, you really have to be focused on that. So we've approached it from several different directions. If you have high-end machine centers, and you have top-of-the-line technology stack, and you focus on data to drive your decisions when you're making capital investments or improvements or expanding into a new customer area that you may not have necessarily, been into, then that's the best way to do it. And, specifically our technology stack has been solely on, government compliance. We're looking forward to a CMMC level 2 compliance here at Dye CNC, meeting all the requirements for that. So Paperless Parts does a great job having an aerospace and defense software application for that, where currently right now, I think last year we quoted $40 million worth of work. Obviously, we didn't win all of that. It would be great, but it would be great, but not great for capacity reasons. But you have to have all of those quotes and all of those packages and you have to control those documents. And so do you want to control them on your server and be held to the requirements that comes to that? Or would it be nice to have something like Paperless Parts where you can drop all that stuff into they make sure that they're in compliance. There's an audit trail that you can, download from them. And so that's really one of the driving factors that we went with Paperless Parts. And then all our other systems that we use all are in compliant with that, and allows us to pull audit reports and allows us to control CUI data as it goes through our workflow here at the shop.
Yeah, nice. I suppose that's a good segue. I know you've been leading the CMMC charge at Dye Precision. What's that journey looked like so far? What's been the hardest part? Jacob, I'm sure you can start to shed light here as well, but if you wouldn't mind open up on that journey, as I know a lot of folks are headed in that direction as well.
Yeah, I'll give you my pain points and then I'll pass you over to the expert here. But yeah, reluctantly, I have been in charge of the CMMC compliance here at Dye CNC, and it is a beast. And if you're on this call right now and you haven't started or started looking at what you need to do for your process improvement here at your shop, and you want to target CMMC level 2, it might feel like a mountain that you have to overcome. So there is a lot of issues. You got to make sure your systems, like I started here at the company with an on-prem server, where you need to think about certain things when you do that. You're gonna have to be FIPS compliant with that, and which means you might have to upgrade your server once a year, and then that's a hardware expense that you don't even think about that you're going to have to do. And that's going to be every single year or every 2 years, because just like your computers that you have, those only last 3 years and then they're outdated. So I looked at it more, and that's why we went completely cloud-based. I'm on the M65 government cloud. I use SharePoint to control all my documents. I have everything off our prim server here, and that's why we have Paperless Parts to control those documents, and then I can control the workflow as it goes through. And we also use JobBoss Squared, the government cloud system there. So everything is within compliance, and they're all targeting CMMC level 2. And we did some research on it and made sure that this provides us, it pushes away a little bit of the responsibility of making sure that we have to maintain a server rack that meets the certain standards the government says, and when they upgrade it and they say you're going to have to do that, so that's completely gone, and it puts the onus on Microsoft, it puts the onus on Paperless, and it puts the onus on JobBoss Square to maintain that. And that has been the best decision I feel like I've made. It also allows us to pivot. If I want to open a satellite facility in Texas, I can do that, and I don't have to put in a new server rack or anything like that. I just have to connect to the internet. So there's great things there. I work with an IT company, our own IT company that we already in-house. We already had an established relationship with. They were great to work with. But I would say if you don't have an IT company and you are a small shop and you're looking at doing CMMC level 2, it might seem daunting. And if you're starting now, everyone's going to have a solution. And in my opinion, they all kind of suck and they all cost too much. So find out, get with somebody like, Jacob Horne here. I think he's going to provide you guys with a lot of insights that would help out. But that's been my experience so far going through this. And, we're audit ready, and who knows what changes are going to come down the road. That's been the other, issue that we've seen is it's constantly evolving and changing, and the deadlines are pushed to the right. I don't think they're going to get pushed anymore, but I'll leave it to Jacob to discuss more on that, because I'm constantly, the second or the third person to hear about any new changes. So.
Yeah, Jacob,
Right.
if
Thanks.
you wouldn't mind giving everybody some background on, what CMMC compliance is, where
Sure.
it's at in the process of being enforced,
Yep.
what mistakes you're seeing, any advice for people, that'd be great.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, okay. So just the high level spiel here to catch everybody up. So conceptually, CMMC is a program that verifies if you have met the terms of your cybersecurity obligations in your defense contracts. So a very common misconception is that CMMC is the thing imposing the requirements on you. You have contract clauses and provisions in your paperwork right now that are imposing those obligations. You have attested to having implemented those things and complied with those things. CMMC is a program that was created to have you prove what you're saying is true. Very long story short, essentially the DoD has had these requirements in their contracts for almost a decade, and multiple major weapon systems were compromised as a result of sensitive but unclassified information in the supply chain, often at small manufacturing environments, being compromised, even though people had been attesting that they had been implementing these requirements. There was zero mechanism for the department to know for sure, other than just taking essentially pinky promises that these things were being done. It became very obvious over the years that they were not being done. It was causing harm to the department. It was causing harm to the lethality of the joint force. If you were to ask people like Brigadier General Murphy back in the day, it's causing harm to the taxpayer. And so Congress said, create a program that makes people prove that they have done the requirements. So the way that I always phrase it is CMMC is making you prove that you did it, not the thing that's making you do it, if that makes sense. But nevertheless, CMMC is this regulatory program, and it is composed of two separate regulations. One is the regulation that outlines the overall program, the 3 different levels, how waivers work, how plans of action milestones work, how assessments work, how roles and responsibilities work. All the policy stuff belongs in one of the regulations. The actual language that will show up in the terms of your contract clause that says you must go get the following CMMC level certification is a separate regulation, because contract clauses and provisions themselves are regulations. And so the reason why this process has taken so long is that the rulemaking process of creating regulations is very long. It's very complicated. It takes forever. And because we have two separate regulations under the umbrella of one program, you guessed it, the Pentagon has two different offices shepherding two different rules together, and the whole program can't execute until they're both done. And one of the offices took longer than the other. So as of right now, the CMMC program rule, the policy stuff, is a regulation in black and white, in effect on the books right now. It went into effect in December of last year. This is why you can go out and voluntarily get a CMMC certification for level 2 right now. But the DoD cannot put it into your contracts as a requirement because the other regulation isn't done yet. So many of your competitors are getting these certifications. There's almost 100 companies that have their level 2 certifications at this point. Many of the organizations that run these certification assessments are booked up for months and months, sometimes even into Q1 of 2026. So just because you haven't seen it show up in your contracts yet does not mean that it isn't happening. It is currently happening as we speak. So a lot of people are saying, well, I will wait to get started on implementation on climbing this mountain that Jason described once I see it in my contracts. So the first thing we'll talk about is when that should happen and why that's a bad idea. So when will you see it in your contracts? Based off our analysis, this is one of the main things that I do for a living. I expect to see CMMC requirements start to show up in defense contracts between June and October of this year. The reason why I say between June and October is that we went back, and this was a very fun experiment, as you can imagine. We went back and looked at how long did it take for these rules to make it through the rulemaking process for the DoD for every single rule that the DoD issued from 2009 until 2024. Controlling for elections, controlling for holidays, controlling for all government shutdowns, all that stuff. And if you overlay that on when the proposed version of the contract language was published last year, that would put the final version sometime around October. However, that other regulation that we talked about, the big policy rule that went into effect at the end of last year, is significantly larger, much more controversial, took way more effort, had a significant number of public comments, almost 2,000 public comments that the DoD had to sift through. It was a massive amount of work for the Pentagon to go to the final version. They actually beat that average timeline by 30%. So if you take that time frame and you combine it with the average time frame, the window, the cone of uncertainty for the storm here should have the requirements show up in contracts between June and October of this year. However, if you wait until it shows up in your contracts, you are setting yourself up for a massive problem because, like Jason was talking about lead times earlier, the amount of time it takes you to implement your cybersecurity requirements and get a certification assessment to prove that you have implemented those requirements is often much, much longer than the lead time for a solicitation to go to contract award. So this is where it becomes a very individual exercise that you would know best is how long does your customer often take from the time a solicitation goes out until the time that a contract is awarded? Because proof via CMMC that you have complied with these requirements in order to handle the DoD's data is a condition of contract award. And so if your customer takes 3 months to go from solicitation to award, you need to go through your full implementation and have your cert in hand within 3 months if you wait until you see it in a solicitation. If your customer goes 30 days and they're just working orders real fast, you have 30 days to go through your implementation. And in our experience, we have a portfolio of over 1,000 defense contractors, most of whom are manufacturers of all sizes. The typical timeline is usually about 9 to 18 months. And this is not a technologically constrained reason. The technology is not the reason why you need to go slow. There is organizational issues. There are organizational debts. Who are the authorized users? What do the data flows look like? Jason, you can see the pain on his face having had to figure all this stuff out. If you're going to go to a full-blown cloud transformation and you're going to lift and shift and migrate everything into the cloud, as Jason would probably recommend, that is not an overnight thing to do. It takes a lot of planning in order to have that happen. And so you have to start to add time before you see these requirements show up in your contracts to when you're going to get started on your implementation. So if you think that your customer is going to put a solicitation in a contract that you want to bid on and be awarded in Q4 of this year, and you've done nothing so far, you are significantly behind the curve on being ready. So it's difficult to tell everybody, like as a rule of thumb, you need 3 months, 6 months, 9 months. How long does your customer take to go from solicitation to award? Add 12 months on top of that as a rule of thumb, and that's how much time you have in order to get ready.
How I know you and I had a conversation, I believe it was at Design to Part in Long Beach this year. You mentioned some instances where folks were getting kind of confused about getting grandfathered into the OEMs and not needing to go out of their way to achieve compliance. What should people be on the lookout for there?
Yeah. So yeah, a lot of people say, well, I'm a subcontractor. One, that does not exempt you from the requirements. Two, they'll say, well, I'm a subcontractor to Lockheed or I'm a subcontractor to Northrop, and we're very important to them and we're friends. And so they are going to altruistically provide me with resources, enclaves, equipment, access, and so on and so forth. And I don't have to worry about what's going on. And that is true for a very small number of companies who those primes have identified as hypercritical. If you have not heard from them yet, you are not as critical as you think, and that is not a viable strategy moving forward, because if you're wrong, then when these requirements start to show up in contracts, you will no longer be eligible for award. Unfortunately, right, and this is not a political show, but the CMMC program was a Trump 1 era program. A lot of people forget that. And it is still a Trump 2 era program that they are now throwing gas on the fire for, while simultaneously also cutting many of the resources that small manufacturers need to offset cybersecurity requirements. So you now are getting it from both ends in the sense that the requirements actually did not go away. The administration came back and said, where the hell is our program to prove that the requirement was what happened for the last 4 years, while also saying, no more, assistance here, no more assistance there. These programs are much smaller, blah, blah, blah. While the primes are also saying, we've put everybody on the boat that we would like to save. Let us know when you have your certification in hand. So do not assume that someone is going to show up to help you. You need to be proactive in figuring out what your customer thinks about when they're going to have the requirements, how much time and lead time you'll have for those requirements, and how good of friends you actually are.
Yeah,
As far
Jake,
go ahead.
can jump in real quick.
Yeah, please do.
You know, and I would say for smaller shops, and if you're not focused or haven't experienced cybersecurity issues yet, I'd be surprised, because I mean, I'll tell you honestly, daily I get phishing attempts, I get spoofed emails from some of my vendors. They contact me asking me to download certain documents. It's one of the biggest risks I have on my go log is cybersecurity risk, and you're going to start seeing that more and more as time goes on. So not focused on CMMC level 2, or you think you're going to be grandfathered in as a critical supplier for a big prime, and you have nothing to worry about, don't need to do this. It'll only take one cybersecurity hack to where you lose all your documents, and then you have to report that, because your SPURS says you have to report that to your customer when you lose your documents. And then guess what? A critical supplier doesn't really become that critical anymore when you're costing the customer a lot of money in IP loss or anything like that. So I would say, even if you're not focused on it, you need the CMMC compliance stuff. It does reduce your costs if you have a cyber rider on your insurance. It helps you out there. So, and then honestly, if you were to have a cyber attack on your critical infrastructure there, and you're down for a week, think about what you're going to lose in one whole week of not being able to process POs, AR. Say your bank account gets hacked. It's a big deal, and it is the #1 threat out there, and they're very successful. Companies are getting hit pretty hard with that. So I would say it's definitely a direction you need to start thinking.
Yeah, maybe I'll just cover, 3 quick things that people should also be aware of, and then maybe I'll end with telling people, how should you strategize around trying to start climbing the mountain, like the best general advice people could have. So one is, a lot of times people will make the mistake and they'll say, well, we're going to be allowed to self-assess. We're small, we're not that important, blah, blah, blah. We won't need to get an external third-party organization to come in and do an external assessment. We can self-assess. That is not true. The number of companies that will get self-assessments for level 2 is going to be extremely small. Through recent DoD guidance that's been published, the thing that drives external assessment is the type of data that you are handling, not the size of your company, not the amount of the data that you're handling, not how much money the contract is worth. It is the type of data. And so if you are handling what is known as controlled technical information, naval nuclear propulsion information, the exact kind of data that defense manufacturers are living and breathing with, that you're dealing with in quoting, that's running through and flowing through your shop floor, that your quality system literally is all oriented around, then you will not be able to self-assess. The other one is, a lot of people go, well, we'll be able to get a waiver. Either, it's funny, under the 1.0 structure back in 2020, people said, we're too important, so we won't be bothered with this. And now what people are saying is, we're too important, and so now we won't be bothered with this, which is also still not true. So waivers for CMMC, as I like to say, are for entire contracts, not for individual contractors. This is laid out very clearly in the CMMC policy. They are for contracts, not contractors. It is a pre-solicitation decision by one of like a dozen people in the entire Department of Defense, known as service acquisition executives, to say that the CMMC requirement for this class of solicitations is not required. Even when they would do that, which is extremely unlikely that they would, there are still cybersecurity requirements that are temporarily in place, and then everyone will still need to go get the certification 180 days later. So the odds of you being able to convince a contract officer, if you even have such a relationship, which you probably don't as a subcontractor, to have them stick their neck out to their boss's boss inside of a program executive office to say, remove basic cybersecurity requirements contrary to Pentagon level policy because this one company can't do it, doesn't like it, won't do it, is not a viable strategy. So do not bank on self-assessments. Do not bank on waivers. And I don't want to scare everybody, but this is a thing that you need to be aware of, separate from DoD enforcement by not awarding contracts, standard contractual remedies. The Department of Justice is pursuing defense contractors of all sizes for not being in compliance right now with their cybersecurity obligations. It has nothing to do with the CMMC program. A lot of people think that settlements under the DOJ's Cyber Civil Fraud Initiative are only targeting very large defense contractors like Aerojet Rocketdyne and Raytheon recently. However, that's not true. The DOJ recently reached a settlement with a 150-person defense contractor for violations of the exact same clauses that everybody has, the ones I was talking about beforehand, for basic things like not having a system security plan, not having the correct cloud enclave in which you're storing the DoD's data. The thing that's important to know about this is that the cost of the violations does not scale down for the size of the company. It is part of the statute. And so Raytheon got hit for, Aerojet gets hit for $4.6 million. This 150-person company also gets hit for $4.6 million because they don't scale the penalties down for the size of the company. So you were talking about a real thing that's happening. We've been told there are somewhere around 100 of these cases pending. The trick with this is that there is a whistleblower incentive in the False Claims Act, as they say. So your internal IT guy who's been telling you we really need to get ahead of this and we've been pushing it off and pushing it off can blow the whistle on your company and then have a law firm work with the DOJ, and they get a portion of the fines levied against your company. So in this settlement of the 150-person company, there's like $4-something million. The whistleblower got paid $850,000. They were just the director of security at this company. And so they are highly incentivized to blow the whistle. Not exactly the thing that, helps you sleep at night, but you do need to be aware if you are actively telling your internal workforce, we're not doing this, or we're going to wait to do it, there are some risks to be aware of. Okay, so maybe just quickly, now that we got the doom and gloom out of the way, what are you supposed to do? Well, like Jason said, it's a mountain you have to climb. Based off the timeline, it is now a mountain you have to run up to the top of because you are essentially out of time. The number one thing that I would recommend to people to do is part of the ticky-tacky, tedious part of these requirements is also a benefit in the sense that the questions that will be asked of you on the assessment are standardized. This isn't like an ISO certification. This isn't like a SOC certification where you don't know what the assessor is going to ask you. It's just whatever's in their mind. Part of the benefit of using the bureaucracy of the government is they have a standard set of things they're going to ask you. We know what's on the exam, if you will. And so as a result, anytime you are going to pay someone money for consultants, for service providers, for solution providers, for anything regarding compliance with these requirements, you need to ask them for what's known as a customer or a shared responsibility matrix. Specifically, you need to ask them for such a matrix mapped to the requirements in a document known as NIST SP 800-171 Alpha. That is the document that contains all of the 320 questions that will be asked during a CMMC assessment. If they don't know what 171A is, immediate red flag. If they tell you that they can do 100% of the things in that document, immediate red flag. If they have a somewhat reasonable service description mapped to the requirements that seem reasonably aligned with what you're paying them to do, good sign that they're probably not full of crap. If you would like an example of what one of these matrices looks like, you can find it on the Summit 7 website. summit7.us, feel free to download it and use it to sort of as the sniff test when you're evaluating other service providers and suppliers. But that's the number one way that's going to happen. You probably don't have the workforce in-house. Even if you wanted to have the workforce in-house, you probably can't afford them. And if you train them up and paid them enough so that they could go from soup to nuts and get you a CMMC level 2 certification from scratch, they're probably going to leave for more money as soon as it's done. So it is far cheaper for you to outsource this stuff, but that puts a big responsibility on you to properly vet the people that you're outsourcing it. And the way that you do that is through those shared customer responsibility matrices properly mapped to 171A.
Awesome. Well, Jason, Jacob, thank you both for the valuable insights there. Jacob, I didn't even have to ask the last question, so thank you for that.
There you go. Yeah.
Want to give some time to the audience here to ask Jason, Jacob, any questions that we didn't touch on here today. Please either submit those through the Q&A box in the bottom right or raise your hand and you'll be able to ask a question. Oops.
Yeah, so if anybody sees this afterwards, I guess while we wait for the questions to come in, and you want to keep up with what's going on, like I said, pretty much my main job is to try to democratize this information as possible. We're very confident that when people understand the nature of the problem, we don't have to pitch them on what's going on, and they often end up calling us. But we do a podcast every Thursday that explains the goings-on around CMMC, DFARS, NIST, everything that's adjacent. We have a live Q&A session on LinkedIn, on YouTube every Friday morning. You can ask us whatever question you want to regarding regulatory questions, technical questions, everything in between. We've been doing that for quite a while now. We've got other podcasts that pop up on the channel. So you can find us on the Summit 7 YouTube channel or summit7.us. All the content's free, and that should help you kind of gauge what's going on. So if you have questions later on, then that's a good place to put them.
Looks like we've got one question in the chat here for Jason. Jason, what was the most difficult aspect of the CMMC process for Dye up to this point?
So I guess it's combining all the different requirements and responsibilities and organizing it to make sure that you're basically putting a program management process in place for implementation. It is probably the hardest thing, I would say. Doing the work and sitting down and making sure that the documents align, your policies that you have align with the NIST requirements that Jacob just talked about. That's key. And then making sure you have evidence to support the policies that you've put in place is also key. And so having some kind of way to control all the changes that you're going to be making in your process and at your company, it seems like when you first look at it, you first sit down and you read it, and you're like, okay, we have to do this, we have to do this, we have to do this. We have to, change our system. We have to implement all these policies and controls. And we have to then make sure that we train everybody on the shop floor and in your front office to be compliant. And then we have to have backup for this and audit trails. It seems like it's so difficult and that you don't even want to start doing the process. And that's why people are reluctant to jump in there. But I would say just take small bites. Have a good process implemented and take small bites as you do it. And that's why it does take a long time, like Jacob said, 9 months to 18 months to put together. But I would say that's I guess that wasn't really the best answer. It's like the tackling the mountain is the biggest problem. And then making sure you're staying consistent and on target with it, because you can't, at being a shop owner, you can't just shut the doors for a month and say, okay, we're going to fix this right now. You still need to pay your employees. You still need to ship parts. So it's not something that you can do. I think if you did that, if you did shut the doors for an entire month and just focused on this within your entire team, you probably could get it done in a month. I don't know, Jacob, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, if it's the only thing that you did, I mean, it depends on the organization's appetite. I'll give you a great example. Prior to this webinar, we were on a call with a sizable company that does defense contracting work, and they spent about 10 months getting everybody together, what needs to happen, approvals, budgets, blah, blah, blah. People go on vacation, people have this, people have that. The primary person running their project left. We hadn't heard from him in 10 months. They called us up, and it's like they're starting over again because it just wasn't a priority, and like they just burned all this time. And so in total, something that, if they had focused and had the appetite to make it a priority, wouldn't have taken very long at all. We have some companies that go through in a matter of, a couple weeks, couple months. But for the average bear out there, that's just not how it works. There's just too much technical and organizational debt to say we're going to be able to do this super, super quickly. I would say just at the last, I don't want to give everybody a bunch of new information right at the end. Some rays of hope here. Manufacturers, especially small manufacturers, have some distinct advantages at tackling these requirements. Specifically, if you don't have as capable of a chief officer as Jason here in your company, the person that should be the point person for this should be your quality manager. It is seemingly strange to people to compare quality systems with the NIST cybersecurity requirements. That is only because people haven't told you you have permission to do that. So there are a lot of overlaps in the management of your quality systems and the management of your cybersecurity system, especially since you're probably going to be outsourcing the technical work. The way I describe this to manufacturers is you need to think of cybersecurity as a different form of a special process. You're going to be outsourcing this work to a specialized processor because it's expensive, it's difficult, you don't do it in-house. You are still on the hook, just like under your quality certifications, for the management of that process, even though you don't do the work directly. So I think if you sit down with your quality manager and look at the requirements, they're going to see a lot of overlaps with the things that they are very good at doing with the cybersecurity requirements. The other advantage being there is that smaller organizations have smaller scopes. There's fewer data flows, there's fewer users. And so you have a knowable environment. And that's a big advantage because a lot of times big organizations, they just don't know. It gets really expensive really fast. So there are some benefits. It is possible. We see people do it all the time. There are companies currently getting certified. But it is something that you have to make a priority and dedicate the time to because it's not going to get done on its own.
Awesome. Well, on the screen here, we've got Dye CNC's website as well as Summit 7's. I'm sure they've got some contact emails on the website if anybody has extra questions. Same thing goes for Paperless Parts, support@paperlessparts.com. Final question from me, Jason, because I ask everybody these days after, a couple of years of, business being pretty slow across the board or just being on one side of the spectrum or the other. There's a lot of uncertainty out there. What are you seeing right now? Are orders ramping up? Are quotes? Is there an influx of opportunity as, tariffs are being pushed and pulled in place? What's the general industry vibe you're getting at the moment?
So I don't know if the industry vibe that we're getting here at the shop is consistent with the industry vibe across Southern California. I can always gauge it by how many applications I get, if other shops are doing well and everything. And I've been getting a lot lately. However, our shop has been doing very well. We're excited to roll out some new products. We have a fully automated cell that's going in for a customer, high-end manufacturing aerospace and defense parts. So we're doing really well. There is markets that are booming right now. I think semiconductor is kind of flat right now. So if that is your shop and you're in that, I don't think that's been really good Q1 and Q2. But if you're into gas and oil, I hear they're booming, and aerospace and defense. Some customers are, there's still a lot of market share out there to grab. So stick to it, keep your price points right, keep your quality number one, and you'll continue to do well as a business.
Awesome. Well, Jacob, Jason, thank you both for joining, hosting today. Everybody on the line, thanks for your attendance. Until the next episode of Pacific Power Hour.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.